My name is Hamid al-Kifaiy. I'm an economist and academic. I have two questions, actually, regarding the environment. One of them regarding the shortage of water and desertification, which is caused by our two neighbors. Obviously, Iraqi rivers flow from Turkey, the main rivers, but there are rivers and tributaries flow from Iran, and they have been diverted, 40 of them, and that caused the lack of 30 billion cubic meters of water every year. And the Iraqi government, successive governments, not just this regime, the previous regime as well, didn't negotiate with Iran. To be fair to the Iraqi government, successive governments, that they have negotiated with Turkey, but not with Iran, even though 40 rivers and tributaries have been diverted into Iran. The second one is regarding gas flaring in the south. This has caused an environmental and health disaster in Iraq, caused diseases, cancerous diseases. Why the Iraqi government has ignored this huge problem, double whammy. It caused, a huge problem in the south, especially in Basra. Why they have ignored this problem and also wasted Iraqi wealth. This gas is burnt in the air and polluting the environment and causing health problems. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's actually start in reverse and get to this question about gas flaring, because I do think it's important. Dr. Torhan?
Okay, thank you. First of all, like what you said about the associated gas. Now Iraq is produce about 60% from the associated gas. So it's about 65. So we still have 35% is unused for producing power. We're going forward, maybe in next 4 years will be 100% useful for associated gas in producing power, especially in Basra. This is the first. The second question, it was about the dams in KRG. Dams issue is federal issue. So whatever or wherever there is rebuilding or repairing or for the dams, it will be federal issue. It will be from the central government budget. But there is kind of dams, like we said it in Arabic, hasidat المياه. That is domestical issue. Even in most of the provinces, it's domestical issue. It's local issue, sorry. So the big dams like Dokan, another dams, it's federal. And now there is several projects to repair and to fix these dams. So it's federal issue.
Okay. Let's move to the question around education, environmental science, and this whole kind of, educational landscape. Sama, do you want to give it?
Actually, it is an excellent question. Thank you very much for this wonderful question. Basically, usually we invest in awareness in general, but there is different level of awareness. We have an awareness in decision making, awareness in organization level, and we do have a public awareness, and we do have an education awareness. We have done a screening for 1.5 years for the education system in Iraq, and you will figure out it's very poor in terms of environmental aspects and how to deal with the climate change impact, and even with the water resource securities and so on. So there is an acute need to invest in that direction. And some local institutes, they doing that, but in the private sector. And what surprised me is to find a school. This school is a private school. They've been given the permission by Ministry of Education. But if you go to their syllabus and you figure out it's rich in terms of environmental aspects, but if you go to the public school, they are rather poor also. The permission has come from the same entity. And this is why I believe I do agree 100% that we should go to that direction and invest in education, because this is what will help Iraq for the long run and back up the whole system. And just one thing I would like to emphasize of what Dr. Torhan mentioned about the technical terminology for the dams. In KRG, this is correct. This is right, that we have to manage our resources from the federal area. There is a central system that the federal government, they really responsible for any dams within the Iraqi territories. However, the water harvesting dams that is built now in Kurdistan region is extremely important for the whole country. Why? Because it's not that dams that controlling water, it's collecting water, and instead of we are losing this water by evaporation. So, so I just want to emphasize on that, not to misunderstand between dams on the mainstream and the water harvesting dams.
Right, right. We're going to come back to the question about Iran because that's important, but I wanted to highlight just a question that came in from online from Shayan Kamil. She notes that three of the core values in the kind of national strategy for Iraq emphasize social effects and human rights. You know, safe right to the environment, attention to social and cultural diversity. But the strategy seems to focus mostly on raising awareness and educational efforts rather than meaningful participation in decision making. So how can the government ensure that local communities are actively involved as partners in decision making? I think this would be a good question for both Dr. Torhan and Tshireen. Torhan, obviously, because the government perspective, but then Tshireen, this seems to relate quite closely to the just energy transition framework. So maybe we'll start with you, and then we can go to Torhan.
Yes, okay. All right. I mean, yeah, it goes back also to the question of education and knowledge. I mean, this is something we see a lot. Who's producing knowledge? Who's generating knowledge? And there is a wonderful professor, you might have heard of him, Shukri al-Hassan from the University of Basra. He's maybe you've seen him on the BBC documentary as well. So there is a lot of voice. There are voices. There are a lot of young voices of people generating knowledge, trying in universities, in different informal sectors as well, to try to generate accurate repercussions of, as you mentioned, the gas flaring and what are their impacts on public health and the impacts on different communities and marginalized communities. But some of them, their voices are either shut down at the end or they are threatened in a way. But of course, I mean, it is definitely important. There are also networks of several civil society organizations that have established earlier this year the Basra Network for Environment, Climate and Security. It's a consortium of different civil society actors that came together to share different knowledge and information across on environmental issues. So there are initiatives that have happened. There are also entrepreneurs, as we have heard yesterday, who have established young startups to be able to penetrate this private sector and so on. So there are different ways and so on. And also your institution, which we're working with, have created the Science Citizen Assembly, or even in other places, to understand how do you link knowledge to the local communities, how do you use science and inform communities and involve them into the decision-making processes. I think this is something that is very important also that there are several initiatives that have happened. I think I've answered the question, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Tshireen. Torhan, we do hear...
finance also should be given to these institutions.
Right.
So support for research, support
Sure.
for public knowledge, availability of knowledge that is not just hidden if it's a study, but available to everyone to comment on it, to reflect on it, and participate actively in decision making.
So Torhan, just to kind of focus the question a bit, we hear a lot from the government, from the Sudani government, that they're open to civil society, they want to involve them in things. But we do hear often a critique from civil society that actually on environmental issues, they're not really involved in decision making. It's more kind of a kind of promotional effort from the government. So can you give us a sense of what the efforts are and what the progress is on this?
Okay, as I mentioned before, to repair the environment or the ecosystem, it's not just like sewage you can make on or off. Iraq suffered as an ecosystem from decades. So now when we start to repair the environment system, it will take time. And to involve with NGOs, yeah, there is several NGOs now working with the government for improving kind of clean power. But it is still experimental. I would like to give an example about that. We worked before years ago with some NGOs for producing electricity for waste management. When we end the project, we've been face to face, there is no legislation about that. So how we can buy, how we can sell. So like Samah said, we need some time for the legislations in order to can work in this kind of issues. Now we have this kind of legislation. So step by step, we will work on that. And even with the NGOs. The other question about the rivers from Iran. You know, the water supply who come in Iraq, we used to have about 55% from Turkey and about 20% from the whole water, especially from Tigris River, from Iran, and the other from Iraq. From Iran to Iraq, there was about 45, 46 many rivers start to be stopped or change the direction to Iraq. Now there is working on that because one of the problems between Iraq and Iran, you know, there is إتفاقية الجزائر, Algeria agreement. Iraq did not admit anymore with Algeria agreement. Iran depend on that. Another point, even in this kind of agreement, because it's established in 70s, so there was, in that time, there wasn't any kind of water crisis. So there is no items or there is no important item about the water sharing or water supply. For that, we are kind of suffering with the Iran side about the waters. Now there is kind of legislation. We start working on kind of legislation and kind of understanding with the Iran about that.
So we're going to close here with two final comments from Samah and Gleda. Samah, I'm wondering if you can reflect on Dr. Torhan's perspective related to Iran, Iraq, and Turkey transboundary flows. And then Gleda, if you can perhaps give us a broader kind of geopolitical context for thinking about transboundary water negotiations.
So, okay. Transboundary water is, I would say, it's a challenge that Iraq is suffering from back to 1920, when the Iraq has emerged as a state. We are living in geographical presence as an outcome for the First World War. And at that time, start the conflict between nations around water resources. Water doesn't respect or give no weight to this political border. But if we make it in simple calculation, if we're going to go to how Iran is influenced Iraq in terms of water resources, there are two main parts, which is Sirwan River, Nahr Diyala River, and we do have Shatt al-Arab. And this is where Iran would influence Iraq in terms of water resources. However, if we make a simple calculation and just calculate whatever Iran has been controlled from water resources and compare it with what we have it from Turkey as well, we're going to find the whole what Iran control, it's probably compare only to one dam from Turkey. This doesn't mean that we should not reach an agreement with Iran. Each single drop of water, it matters for Iraqi perspective. But end of the day, we have to be more rational. And we have to tend more to focus on why these dams, massive dams, has been built from Turkey side. I can imagine that Turkey, at the state level, they do have their own needs, but we need, end of the day, to negotiate agreements. And by the way, most of the negotiation, and when it comes to signing MOU or a protocol, and sometimes they say, Turkey they say, or Iran they say, they're going to say, okay, we're going to share with you a fair water allocation. But fairness in terms of Turkey, this is, sounds different than what fairness from our side. Thank you.
Sorry, sir. Gleda, final comment on this?
Thank you. So I think we have to move away from looking at transboundary water as a zero-sum game, which has really stymied cooperation in the past. Every country surrounding Iraq should have an interest in a healthy river basin ecosystem and stability in Iraq, which will be deeply affected by the water flows. But so I think there's three things here. One is a few years ago in 2021 under Barham Saleh, there was a group of NGOs, consultants, who drew up the Mesopotamian Revitalization Initiative. I think that is sitting, gathering dust on a shelf somewhere, and should be revitalized because it does provide a good framework for looking at this on a regional basis and looking at development issues too that are connected with the river. Secondly, dust storms. So as have been mentioned, this is a real reason for the region to cooperate. So it's in the interests of the Gulf states, of Kuwait, of Saudi Arabia, of UAE to help invest actually in land revitalization and in restoring rivers in Iraq, so that dust does not come and hit them harder. And there is some cooperation going on that front. And thirdly, I just want to mention land management. Our State Department colleague mentioned this earlier, so important for Iraq's diversification. 33% are employed in the rural areas, very, very different from the GCC countries, more similar to Morocco, if anything. And this is where Iraq can really help manage that balance of trade problem that it's going to run into with declining oil revenues in terms of lowering the food bill, which is massive at the moment.